Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. So good for everyone to be back with us. We're at episode number 131. We're going to talk about the thing that was Google I/O. The recap. With me today, as always, Mr. Danny Blue.
Hey, everybody.
Amal Hussein.
Hello, hello.
And of course, our guest today, Kenneth Christiansen.
Hi, and welcome.
Welcome back to the show, Mr. Kenneth. So we're going to get right down into it. Let's talk about the Google I/O. Some of us were there. I think actually all of us were there. I'm still recovering.
Yeah, no, it's been, it feels like it's been a long time ago, and I haven't slept since.
Yeah, I have only recently recovered my sleep patterns from being in California for a week, so...
Well, I went to another conference the week after, so I'm also recovering.
And you had the most miles to travel, if I'm not mistaken, Kat.
Yeah, pretty much. All the way from Europe, Northern Europe.
So, given that now we've had a little time to recover, ladies and gents, how was the Google I/O? I mean, there was unlike years past, there was a significant amount of web things this year at I/O. Quite nice.
There was a ton of web stuff. I was actually kind of surprised.
Yeah, I would also say that the event was it was heavily criticized last year because people standing in the sun, getting sunburns, they were standing in line to get in, and then they got finally to the door and people said, no, go to another one, it's full. So this year they had big tents, could fit a lot of people. You could reserve a seat up front for one track because there were parallel tracks, so you had to choose one. Even if you decided to go somewhere else, there was a pretty good chance you would get in. They had shades everywhere, so it was really well organized. Even food took me 15 minutes to get dinner, so really good event.
And air conditioning. Let's not forget that some of these tents had actual AC. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was not only air conditioning, but really plush carpet for those of you who are into carpet. Honestly, this year this is my third year going, and by far this was my favorite I/O. Not only was it just organized, but it really felt like there was a breadth of topics, and then there was a lot of web stuff. This may be even the record for web content at I/O. So.
Yeah, so like always, people complain that the keynote didn't have a whole lot of web, and there was a lot of Android. Actually, I think it was a lot about Google brands. So they had a special section for YouTube. They were talking about the new photo lens. They were talking about Google Home, all of these big Google things. Yes, they did have a bit of time talking about Android. And for the web, they basically only mentioned, I think, progressive web apps once, which I think is kind of normal if you take into consideration that everything going on the web is all public and it's not really news to most people.
Yeah, there was also a developer keynote this year, and I thought that was pretty cool. I kind of wish it was reverse. I wish the developer keynote would be the first thing we talk about, but I understand that it's a wider audience in the morning. But I thought that was really great. It was actually nice to be in the amphitheater on the first day and actually be looking at a code editor, And so in that sense, I was like, all right, great. This feels like a developer conference again.
So real quick, so this was my first year actually attending Google I/O. Was the rest of you guys had been there before, correct? All right, awesome. Because I just remember, because last year was also the first year that it was at the Shoreline Amphitheater, correct?
That's correct.
Well, okay. It was the first year since the first year. So 10 years ago when we first did this, it was at Shoreline, and then it went to San Francisco, and then it came back last year.
Okay, yeah, because I do remember hearing stories last year of people getting sunburned and all that kind of stuff, and even in the aside from all the venue changes that they made to make it better, they even had it like they actually even gave out like everybody got hats, sunglasses, and sunscreen, like was in the little bag that you got when you started.
Yeah, that's true, but I think they also gave a little bit of like sun cream the year before, but it was definitely a better one this year. So I guess we should start talking about like the content of Google I/O. Uh,
No, I disagree. I think it's all about sunscreen.
okay.
Yes, we should absolutely get into the content.
Yeah, so definitely you saw like in the keynote, like there's a lot of focus on like Google Home. So I would assume that's because of Amazon Echo being a good success and Google basically playing catch up. There was also a lot of focus on AI and about like all the advances that Google are making in that area. Some of it I found a bit scary, like talking about like, hey, now we have the AI and maybe it can help like generate like new materials. I think that's fine, but if you start like creating all these like new materials like really fast, you might not figure out like that some of these might actually be dangerous, and maybe you find out too late if things just start happening way too fast. Um, but the cool thing I saw about the AI was the integration with like the whole new like Google Lens, or what's called a photo lens, I don't remember, which is basically integrated to the Google Assistant. So you just like fire up your Google Assistant on your phone, point it at like a business, and it will say like, hey, you're at Starbucks, and give you like information. You could take a picture of a flower and it will tell you what kind of flower it is. So I don't know how well that really works and they haven't launched it yet, but I found that really, really exciting and interesting. And finally, we can actually.
It reminds me of sorry, it just reminds me of Goggles. Do you remember Goggles?
I remember Goggles.
Like, yeah, I mean, Goggles was another Google thing that kind of did that, which, I mean, it's been a long time since I think Goggles came out, but that's what it reminded me of. If you've out there and you're like, I don't understand what Lens is, but if you remember Google Goggles, it's kind of in the same vein, same sort of thing.
But I think there's a big difference because like Goggles was more like, yeah, you could like scan like QR code, might be quite useful, a barcode as well, and it will try to like find like similar images on Google. But now they're trying to add some intelligence as well. Actually say like, this is the flower, this is exactly where you are. They're also talking about their virtual positioning system like GPS called VPS, something like inside-out tracking, where we'll like identify like points of interest, probably using your GPS as well, and like identify that, oh, you're in front of this statue, or this is actually the Eiffel Tower or something like that.
Well, the demo they showed for VPS was pretty cool. It wasn't a live demo. It was one of those. It was a recorded demo, and I believe it was one of those, we promise this works type of things. But it was in a Home Depot or a Lowe's, right? So the guy just held up a phone and was like, help me find a screwdriver of a certain type or something like that. And if he held up his phone, it would actually like overlay directions on the ground of, like turn at this aisle and then here it is right in front of it, which was very cool. And I believe for all of the VPS stuff, you have to have a Project Tango enabled device, right?
Yeah, I mean that was basically Tango's big sort of intro is the idea that if you had a stack of sensors that sort of allowed a much more finer grain understanding of where it existed within, a given space or world space, that you could do things like that where you have augmented reality overlays of, find me this direction stack and go this way. It's been a long time coming. I mean, that stack, I still use one of my original Tangos, for as a space heater during the winter. It's really trick when it works, and then it's not trick when it melts. But they've made major inroads since the sort of initial versions.
Project Tango only exists in two states, either working or melted.
Well, it happened during one of the demos too, I guess. Someone was like, "Oh, they had like a someone went to one of the talks and they're like, oh, they had a could not connect to Tango service error, which is dreaded because for those of you who have never worked with Tango, like once you got that error, like your options were restart it and wait, or turn it off and stick it in a refrigerator for the original, which was a legitimate thing we used to do at the office.
Justin, are you trying to tell me the thing's overheated?
Well, it was, those were early Tegras. It was a hell of a chipset when it wanted to function, and then it would melt because the stack of stuff on there. But it got significantly better. Like, you can still use them. The software updates particularly really help with that. So I think with a lot of the things that you've seen, now you start to see that stack in, like the Lenovo device and everything else. Ideally, in a perfect world, generic sensors API for the web gets access to that stack, eventually. Wishful thinking on my part.
There's work going on exposing that. Like,
really? Kenneth, tell me all about that. I'm curious. How do you know about it, sir?
Like depth sensing cameras. So there's actually work going on standardizing that, and there's actually an implementation for Chrome. So at least that works with the Intel RealSense camera, and I actually believe that someone was working on making it work with Tango as well. But yeah, we need to get that out there, and we need to get people like to play around with these technologies and find out whether we have having like the right APIs. So actually, Google, they also announced at Google I/O, if anyone looked at the presentation around Web VR, that they are considering other things in VR. It's not just like VR is just one end of the scale. So they also have what some call it mixed reality, some people call it augmented reality. So Google is looking at that as a whole big scale instead of like separate things. And with augmented reality, that could be without depth sensing camera. It could be just like identifying what's in the picture and showing like, hey, there's a flower. But it could also be something more like something like mixed reality, like Microsoft is showing with HoloLens. And they actually announced that they're having a special version of Chromium called Chromium Web AR, and some demos built around that. So that was actually launched, and I believe that's available on GitHub.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for their approach. I mean, it is different than sort of the competition in that regard. I mean, they are trying to put it in places that are more, I would suppose, consumer friendly. Because as a developers, sometimes we lose focus of, I have fancy gear from XYZ manufacturer of things, which, to some extent, it's, that's how I always felt about the early Tango stuff, was it was so cool to use, but in terms of like actual functionality that an end user was going to use, it was hard to make the jump because no one had a device that would run it. And there were cool uses of it in terms of augmented. So I think it's interesting that they've sort of decided that, we want to mix these things together, and it's not just this native play. It's also, we've got builds of Chrome now and those sorts of things. So it gives me great hope.
Well, I guess it has something to do with the hardware. If you looked at like the hardware for doing these things with depth sensing cameras and things, they were pretty big in the beginning and probably like draining a lot of battery. So with time, you've seen these are getting smaller and smaller. I know that Intel had like a RealSense working on a phone at some point. And so I think maybe next year, maybe a couple of years from now, you'll probably see this as part of like actual phones. They're already having like, I think there's 2 Tango phones out there. They're pretty big, probably a bit too big for most consumers. But in a year or 2 from now, this will be like regular thing, just part of any phone. So Google will be ready at that point. And hopefully the web will be ready as well.
Yeah, I mean, I personally feel like Google Lens was kind of an actualization of like Google Glass and obviously goggles. But I mean, I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars on, something that I'm going to wear on my face when my phone is really like what I interact with every day, right? And so being able to kind of like use your phone and kind of get Google Glass-like behavior, I mean, that's pretty, that's pretty cool. And I mean, it feels like that's the golden standard now, right? So it's like, okay, this is really cool technology. Can you get it on a mobile phone, right? And like, can the mobile phone be under $1,000, right? And so for me, like that's the sweet spot for like mass adoption. And ideally, can it run in a web browser? So
That's what I care about.
So let's move on to Kotlin. We don't need to spend too much time on this. I mean, it's kind of been beaten to death, but like really exciting. Like the loudest cheers, I think, at I/O was the Kotlin announcement. And actually, I saw an interview after I/O with Sundar, and Sundar noticed that like Kotlin got the loudest cheers, like and it kind of like outweighed his some of his announcements.
But what does that say about Java? Like people are like, "Yay, Kotlin!" Like, "Oh, yay, oh, Java."
Well, I think Java and Android as well. Like, it's kind of been a strained relationship, right? I mean, they just like aren't they just now getting on 1.8? And so they're kind of like they've been behind Java, and Java itself is it's Java. So no offense to Java lovers, but.
I think that's the whole point, that like a lot of people use Java because that's the option, and they look at iOS, Apple users, they get like Swift, and they're like, why don't we have something like that? And I see Kotlin as something like CoffeeScript is to JavaScript. It's like a nicer language on top of Android, like on top of like the native thing like Java. And a lot of people got introduced to it because they're using Android Studio, which is based on IntelliJ, which is written in Kotlin, because Kotlin is created by the people writing Android Studio. So a lot of people starting like looking at Kotlin and seeing that it's just a nicer language to program in. It fixes a lot of the issues that people have with Java while still remaining compatibility. And now they're even looking at making it better and better. They have a lot of inspiration from other languages such as like Python and JavaScript. So that of course, like people that already use JavaScript and have to use like Java will like start hating things because this is so much easier in JavaScript. Now it's almost as easy in Kotlin, or if not easier, and then be able to like interrupt with all the existing code. But they also had like other interesting announcement that they're actually trying to bring Kotlin to LLVM, which means then you cannot integrate with Java, at least not directly, but at least like for people that are working on like the NDK, like real native development kit, like for Android, they can use like Kotlin as well. So it kind of seems like the replacement of Java for Google, which is probably good with all the things going on with Oracle and the position Java has always had on Android.
I mean, you have to imagine that's where some of this is coming from. I mean, I was sitting with one of my good friends is Cody Henthorn is a GDG organizer up in Baltimore, and he's an Android dev, and he was very, very excited about the Kotlin announcement. That was actually like one of his predictions, and on his wish list for stuff they would announce was like official Kotlin support. But you have to imagine that it's, oh hey, the community likes this. You have to imagine that it has something to do with this stuff going on with Oracle.
I think it's part of what happened, but I also think that Google needed some kind of response to like the whole shift thing happening on Android, like on iOS, because everyone is happy saying they're like more productive, and it feels like Android is living in the past, right? So that's no longer the case.
Yeah. And Kotlin it looks very approachable. Obviously they gave a very what is the word I'm looking for?
High level.
They did a really high level overview, and they showed like a Java class, and it's like this is everything that you would have to do pretty much to be doing your best practices and all that stuff, and it's like 2 or 3 lines in Kotlin, but it looked very approachable and looked much more interesting to me than Java.
Yeah, and it has super good like tooling support because, as I said, like Android Studio is written in Kotlin. So I assume that Android Studio will handle Kotlin code really well with all refactoring support and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. For me, Kotlin just made Android sexy again. Feels like we're kind of going back in time a little bit. And then I thought the JetBrains partnership was pretty cool. And all of these new languages, like even like Go, for example, for writing server-side code, like the newer the language, like the more you get to build upon really cool, fun principles, right? So you kind of like get to stand on the shoulders of giants every time you write a new language at this point, because you're so much wiser, and you have different use cases that you can kind of think for and handle more gracefully and more elegantly. So I'm really jealous that like they got this. I mean, this feels like when we got ES6 and ES7 features, So I think JavaScript needs some needs some cool features. Private's coming back, right? And private's going to be in the language now. I guess that's sexy enough.
Yeah, no, private's great.
So now we're talking about Android. What do you guys think about the whole Android Go?
I love it. I think the Android Go thing is awesome, and it's also kind of on message with a lot of the PWA main ideas, right? So for anybody that doesn't know,
like, quickly, introduce.
Yeah. So if any, I also recommend everybody go, watch. But so what Google Go is that, or I guess the main idea is that there are a lot of countries that are just coming online for the first time, and they're not using a computer. They don't even have a computer. Their only way of accessing the internet is through a phone, and in a lot of these places, it is a very low-powered Android device. So what Google has done is that it's kind of like a special low-powered device configuration for their newest operating system. So if you are on the newest Galaxy or a Pixel, you're going to get the soup to nuts, all the best stuff of Android. But if you are on a lower powered device, you will get a lower powered optimized version of the Android operating system to help it run on your phone much better. And one other cool thing is that if your applications are optimized to run on Android Go, or they're optimized to run on lower powered devices, on devices that are running Go in the Play Store, your app will be surfaced above everything else. So if you think about the vast number of people that are coming online in a big market is India, if you have an app that is optimized for Go, you have a better chance of there's a better chance of your app getting discovered in a place like India, because it's optimized for lower powered devices.
But that's only like half of the story. The other half of the story is that actually like the infrastructure is really, really not good in these areas like India, and it takes a long to become better. So this is not like we have we have 4G everywhere, and soon we'll probably have like 5G. There it might take like a decade. It also means that people have to pay a lot of money per megabyte. Sometimes just to download an app, which might be 10 megabytes, might cost like a whole week of pay. So when you get an update from Facebook which says like please install 140 megabytes, people just don't update. So that's a big issue they have in the area, because it's just really expensive. So Google is also putting that front and center, like you can really see like your data plan, like how much you have downloaded, because people in Africa and in India, they turn it on and off all the time because they don't want to like waste the expensive data packages on like some app downloading things in the background. But that's also interesting because Google made a limit on the size of these like Android Go apps, which they have to be below 10 megabytes. And 10 megabytes is actually a lot for me. Like if you looked at like a company like Twitter, when they worked on the progressive web app, they got it to be around like 1 megabyte, and making sure that after that you only download the data that you need. It doesn't download like unnecessary data that you already have available. So talking to different Android developers at Google I/O, a lot of people said that it's actually really, really difficult with Android today to make an app which is less than 10 megabytes. So maybe this is a great opportunity for progressive web apps. And I would really, really love if Google would add like discoverability of progressive web apps to the Play Store as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
that would be really cool.
what a great idea. Well, I mean, even on search, right? Like with AMP, there's discoverability there.
Right.
Like I wonder if there was, well, there's always like their mobile friendly logos, but I don't think that's necessarily like PWA, right?
No, and that's actually going away.
I hope so, because I think it's such a norm at this point that, you know, it's odd when sites aren't mobile friendly, but yeah. So to Kenneth, to your point about data, somebody mentioned a quote at I/O that really resonated with me, which is that like data is currency in most developing countries, and like we have to think about mobile data as currency and treat it as such, right? And so when developers are, you know, code splitting or optimizing, or, you know, just there's hard dollars, you know, behind that for people without much disposable income. So
Yeah, I'm actually like when I saw like some of these like new UI they did for Android Go, I like even like for YouTube, like it would like tell you like how much it would cost to watch a video. And it would be kind of nice to have some of these features available maybe as an option on regular Android. I could imagine if I'm traveling like in Vietnam where I don't have to pay roaming, I would definitely want to know like what I'm using my data for and how much it costs me. Um, so I hope that they don't limit all of these features just to Android Go, but consider the rest of the world as well.
Did they say if Android Go was something that could actually be like turned on any
No,
device, or is
it
it something
seems
that
to
is
be like a
only?
specific configuration if your device is less than 512 megabytes of RAM and stuff like that. So there's like it's kind of like a hardware configuration. And they said there will always be a Go configuration for any Android version going forward. Um, it also brings me to the other point. I was seeing like this great talk with I think there were four speakers. I don't remember all the names, but I do remember Robert Nyman, who's a friend of mine, and it was like really exciting about like what Google thinks you need to do for like the next billion or next 2 billion of users. And one of the things that they were mentioned is that you have to think about like people speak like multiple languages, and I was really happy to see that because I do come from Denmark. We speak Danish, and in professional, like I work for an American company like Intel, we speak English. So at work, a lot of people might speak English, at least with when they're working with other branches abroad, right? Maybe I have like my wife speaks like Portuguese. I have friends which speak like because I lived in other countries, maybe speak Dutch, German. So we're kind of like used to having like all these different languages and switch between them all the time. It was like super annoying on Android and any other system. It's just not built for it. Like I know that the keyboard, for instance, like the new Gboard on Android is much better. It can handle multiple languages, but it doesn't know the context. They're talking so much about like artificial intelligence, like we can detect, you're writing in English or you're writing in Danish. Why not detect that I always speak English with Justin, or I always speak like Portuguese with my wife, and I always speak Danish with my mom, and actually tries to like when you suggest words, like just use that. And I think so many like Google properties they don't like follow these guidelines they have, and they really ignore that the world is multilingual and most people are actually bilingual. Um, because like all of Europe, I guess, is mostly bilingual because you speak your native language and speak English. You probably learned another language at school as well. Um, so I think just building this in to Android and all the apps would really make a huge difference for a lot of people. We don't all live in the US.
yeah, I grew up in Dubai. I'm an American. I was born in New York, but I am multilingual as well. I speak four languages, and I couldn't agree with you more, Ken. I think what you're seeing is a deficiency because it's an American company, and I think we're very kind of English centric here. We speak
Yeah.
American, right? So, but what you just suggested sounds like a really great TensorFlow project. So maybe that could like be something I have on.
Yeah.
Speaking of TensorFlow, Amal, what is TensorFlow?
Oh, TensorFlow is awesome. It's for people like me who are like web people who are like, I don't get machine learning and AI. It's very confusing. So it's an AP. It's I don't know. I don't even know. It's like a bunch of numbers. Really, it's a matrix that you can train, and using Python to write services. You can give it a data set, train your data set, right, and easily deploy it to Google Cloud. And so what it does is it helps you build AI and build machine learning, and you don't have to be a data scientist or a PhD to do it, right? It's a very high level, simple API. You just need to learn a little bit of Python. Super easy. And you can easily train you can use open data sets. You can easily deploy to the cloud. Lots of good stuff there. I'm not doing it any justice, but that's my summary.
Yeah, so TensorFlow is not Python only. It's basically like as far as I understand, it's like a deep neural network, which means it's a neural network which has more than one level deep. So it's kind of like, you can think of it like a pattern matching on steroids. So give it a lot of photos like of a cat and a dog, and then after having trained it, it will build its own like deep neural network. And then you can give it another picture and say, is this a cat or a dog? And it will tell you whether it's a cat or a dog. There's a few things to keep in mind. If you give it a photo of a banana, it will still say it's either a cat or a dog. It doesn't have this thing, well, it's not a cat or a dog. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you really need to train it. So it's not like a perfect system. It's not so intelligent. People always talk about like artificial intelligence. I basically see it as like a really, really great pattern matching engine which you can train. And the cool thing that was announced at Google I/O is that they're actually implementing, like Google have been working on specialized hardware, the TPUs, which they have in the data center, that's so much more efficient for dealing with these kind of like questions and training sets. But they're also building that on top of like Android devices. So there'll be a TensorFlow Lite, probably like a native, maybe Kotlin, Java API, maybe NDK as well, on Android devices, so you can actually write these things for your apps. So that also brings me to the big question, what does this mean for the web? Is it time that we start working on a Web Tensor API? How would that look? Will Apple come with something similar for iOS maybe a year from now? So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for such an awesome explanation. Can we just pretend like I said that? Can we edit that?
So I actually
Sure.
So this is actually one thing that I think I understand how it works. I'm a much higher level of, okay, now I want to use TensorFlow, because they said TensorFlow was all over the place. It actually became a little bit of a joke between me and a few people that were there, that if we had any decision that we had to make while we were there, we're like, oh, well, we'll probably need TensorFlow to be able to solve this. And it could be like, where do we want to go get drinks after this, or something, something dumb like that. But so the way that I understand it, the way that you would actually use something like this is that you would use like I said, there's a Python API, I think there's a Go one, there's several different ones. You'd use some of these APIs to build your neural networks, feeding it a bunch of different data. And then it's the type of thing where you could then just set up talking about leveraging it on the web. You could, if it is a picture or something, you could create an app, upload a picture to a service you created, and have it run through all the stuff, and then just feed the information back. So just from how do we use this in the web without actually having something like TensorFlow built into the browser? That is how. Right now, if you wanted to make use of it, and Kenneth just posted the docs, there's Python, C++, Java, and Go APIs available right now. Yeah, so that's how you would have to interact with it on the web as of now, but would still let you do some pretty cool stuff. Also, depending on what your data sets are.
Yes. So the interesting part about TensorFlow Lite is that it actually is on your device, so it's on-device lookup. And that will also work if you're offline. So currently, if you have to use it on the web today, you will have to go to to Google Cloud and run on a server and get a result back. So maybe you could use something like TensorFlow even for saying you want to identify a pattern using your accelerometer on your phone, whether people are playing with a lightsaber, uh, and you want to identify this, then well, maybe you can train a lot of phones doing that, and then actually put that into your TensorFlow Lite like database or like storage on this device. So deploy that from the cloud. Maybe you upload to the cloud. You get a better training set. You get like a miniature training set of the best. Pull it down to your device again, and then even offline you can detect these things. This also might mean that things like voice recognition will work on the device. It will be much faster. It doesn't depend on your network connectivity. And we're just like talking about like countries like India and Africa where connectivity is quite expensive and not reliable. So this can make a huge difference in these places.
Well, don't you think another interesting application is that like you don't actually have to share your data to train the same models, right? So I mean, like the fact that you can deploy it to the cloud and like, secret science group number one and secret science group number two can like actually train the same machine, using their own secret data, which is kind of cool, right? So it kind of brings like some collaboration into this like space that's kind of been, I think, a very kind of like cloak and dagger.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, and I do see the point of having it on device as well, in addition to like it running on the cloud. So it would be interesting what we can do in that area for the web.
So speaking of cloud, I mean, we like have to like talk about Firebase briefly. So Cloud Functions, I think, was like the new kind of feature that they rolled out. I know Firebase also is open source now, which is exciting. But I think like I'm excited about Cloud Functions. Like I'm excited to see something compete with Lambda. So.
Yeah, Fire Function, like, or the like Google Cloud has had like Cloud Function for a while, and now we have like the Firebase like Cloud Functions. Like this was like one of the missing things for me actually trying to use Firebase, because like with like App Engine or other cloud systems, you can have like you can build your own server. And which means that you can, I got this image, but the phone is like high resolution. I want to like give it another image and things like that. It will have higher resolution. So exactly, don't send like a big image down to like people in Africa, which can't see it on the phone anyway. So you kind of like need a way that you can treat like to intercept like when things are going on, when things are being written in a database, when you get an HTTP request. So Google has been talking a lot about like, for instance, the purple pattern, like how you should serve things from using HTTP to push and stuff like that. But you couldn't do that like in a nice way where you can do things yourself, like writing your own server in Firebase. Now you have hooks where you can use like Node.js, and you can start doing some of these things. Like someone uploads a picture, then you can modify it using Node.js code and actually store a different image on your server. I think that's pretty cool.
It's super cool, but it also like, I mean, for me, it's exciting because it just kind of opens up, your tool set as a developer, right? I mean, for most applications these days, like really simple CRUD apps or things that do a few things, you really don't need this big complicated server, right? And if I can get a free tier on Firebase and, and also have like integrated like AI APIs available, right? Like that's a really exciting. It's an exciting time.
I think there's like 2 points of the Cloud Function for Firebase. I think there's been a lot of users who really wanted to have like being able to write their own like code like that, like they used to have like a server. On the other hand, this is like you separate everything out to a function, which means that it scales. Like it's not one server that has to like deal with a lot of different clients. This you don't know which server this runs on. Like if you suddenly get like people uploading like 100,000 pictures per minute, Google can just scale that to all their function, all the different servers, and have it run in parallel. So that's really, really nice.
Yeah. So we've been talking about a lot of server stuff, some mobile, some native mobile stuff. We should talk about how well represented the web platform actually was at the at I/O. And so like there was everything from the actual platform itself and web components and service worker and stuff like that to a lot of talk about progressive web apps. There was a bunch of stuff about that, like tied to like what is a progressive web app, how does how Android is going to continue to treat progressive web apps, how to build PWAs with popular frameworks. There was a bunch of stuff. So I don't know where you guys want to start.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of things going on with progressive web apps, and they were basically everywhere. One of the interesting parts is that a lot of people who worked on progressive web apps probably used Lighthouse, and Lighthouse is this kind of like application that will run and check your code and say like whether it's a progressive web app. It'll give you scores for performance, like audit your code, and they're integrating that now into DevTools, so it's right there in Chrome. So I think that's like super cool. They were also showing some of the things that are missing currently with progressive web apps. Like people have been probably using like Twitter Lite, and every time they had to upload a picture, like it was kind of like complicated. They didn't have like a nice selection dialog, so they're working on that. It's actually behind a flag in Chrome today. They also said that they will support the minimal UI display mode in the web app manifest. And a lot of things around.
Also, I'm sorry.
No, continue.
No, the web manifest now also is not. There's no secret algorithm, right? They're letting you decide when to prompt it, right? You can now prompt your users with, "Hey, add me to home screen," right? Versus like waiting for them to like visit your site.
No, it's actually not exactly how it works.
Isn't that like that's kind of the announcement? Like that's what I got. That's not the case.
People got that wrong.
I'm people.
No, it got. What he meant to say was, and Kenneth can correct me if I'm wrong, but what he meant to say is that when a logarithm trips and say you've hit the normal time when you would prompt to say add to home screen because the user is visited within the system, in that allotted time slot, you can now listen for that and say, I don't want to prompt you right now for it, but I can prompt you when I so please later on. That API is being added, so you can't just inherently say. It's not like the thing that everybody tries to do now, which annoys the entire world, which was every time you land on a page now, it says, do you want to get notifications on the fly? Because they're not, you can trigger the notifications API via, without a user interaction. It's not that. So you're not going to get pummeled with add to home screen pops the same way you necessarily would get pummeled with notification.
Yes, so...
Yeah, I think that... I'm sorry, Kenneth, go ahead.
So actually you've always been able to do that. It might have been a bit hidden and the API was not that good. So me and Marcus, we've worked together with some of the Google guys, Matt, I think it's called Matt, on actually like improving this API in Chrome and in the spec as well. So it's added to the spec now. And there's even like talk about like not prompting at all. So today it's the way that with the new API, like you'll say, hey, you passed the engagement check. It will show you a prompt and you can decide not to show it. In the future, it will not show anything. Like you can at that point decide like whether you want to show a prompt or whether you want to show a prompt in the future. And I think that's really, really interesting. And that's more or less what people really want. Because today it was like people, you might have an app and you might be doing something very important like buying a flight ticket, and then suddenly you don't want to see like, please add to home screen. You want to see it at the right point. And it might be interesting because like it might be that Google will do something similar for other APIs. So we do see pages where you just load it and immediately would ask you, hey, please can I send you push notifications? Hey, please let me allow to use your geolocation. Maybe some of these things in the future could require some kind of engagement as well. So at least that you cannot like show it immediately.
Yeah, so it's to me. I think a good example is, so I work for a company called LiveSafe, and we build safety software, and we have an ability. So we have these small web views for certain cases so you can check in, so that you can say like, yes, I'm okay, or no, I'm not. That is a use case where it would be a really bad time if they met all the PWA criteria. It would be a really bad time to show a little pop-up that says do you want to add this to the home screen, when really what the answer you want is, are you okay or not? So there are cases where you might technically be a PWA, but you'd never want that prompt to appear.
Right. One of the other things I saw is that there's a lot of talk about like web payments, and web payments so far has been like either like the credit card you registered in Chrome or using Android Pay. And in some places, like in little Denmark, we don't have Android Pay, and it will probably be one of the last places on this earth where we will get Android Pay. But we do have like our own systems, like something called Dancard, something called Mobile Pay. So Google is actually looking at opening up the web payments platform for other companies to add their payment solutions. So that will, in the beginning, work with native apps. So if you have payment apps like Samsung Pay or like the apps I just mentioned in Denmark, they will actually be able to integrate with web payments using extensions to the web app manifest. So that's really, really exciting. And they also said that they were working together with PayPal on making this work for web apps as well. So where the payment app would be a web app. So very, very exciting stuff. I think that will be like a pretty much a game changer for the web, especially if you get like systems. Maybe Google could even integrate it with like the whole like Play Store, and you can get like these micro payments, and suddenly like this is like a big thing for games. They really want to have like these small micro payments inside because that's how they actually earn money. So maybe that could really make a big change for the web.
I mean, that's super exciting. Honestly, like, what's the security around that? I mean, I don't know if this is like, and also like, where is it on the timeline? Like, how far away are they from?
Well, the spec is there, so they worked on it. They have interest from other vendors as well. They announced they're working with Samsung on Samsung Pay, and I believe like Alibaba on Alipay, so for China. So I'm pretty sure that the security model is there because it's what they use for web payments. And you already have payment apps on these phones which are secure. So the payment apps, the native apps will have to go through like Google review. They'll have to be on the Play Store as well. So that should have been handled pretty well. Plus, of course, like there will be like some kind of like check that this is actually the app that you're talking about. So this is all dealt with using like two manifest files. So one manifest file for explaining like how just using the regular web app manifest, showing exactly how it works and which app it ties to, and another one from the side so that they have like the security model. I don't know all the details, but I looked at it before and it seems pretty safe, and I'm pretty sure that it is.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work on the payment request API over the last, quite a while now, at least a couple of years, I think, is when it finally went into the standard side. And Chrome is not the only one that is sort of on board with it too at this point. Firefox and Edge, I believe, are also on board with the payment request API. So ideally, as you start to see these integrations land through third-party, payment systems, at the end of the day, the real winners are both those store merchants, which get a very much increased flow in terms of the ability to convert faster, as opposed to the same forms that we see on the web that we all wish we could rewrite because they're absolutely horrendous. And then on the other side too, users get a very fast way to simply buy what they're looking to buy, as opposed to having to go through the payment, shipping, normal things that we often do.
Exactly. So there was a lot of Polymer announcement as well at Google I/O. So that's your area, Justin. So what do you think? Yeah.
That's my
area.
area.
I saw you publish a Polymer element this morning. So.
Yeah, I've been stacking them up lately, admittedly, because I've written like, admittedly, I've written like 200 web components for a project we've been working on lately. So I got a lot of web components lying around that I'm like, maybe this one becomes public.
Well, isn't that the whole point of web components, right?
That's the beauty of it. The reusability, interoperability, all the good. Yeah, sharing is caring. It really is at this point.
Honestly, the Polymer logo should just be a Care Bear, don't you think? Like, wouldn't that be a better logo for web components than that, like, silly whatever the hell it is? I don't even know. It's like an Allen wrench. I don't even know what it is. What is it? I don't know. It should be a Care Bear. That's what it should be.
Yeah, it's a Polymer snake.
Okay, whatever.
We should have Lars on. He can talk about the Polymer snake game you guys worked on too.
So Polymer 2, super exciting. Talk about I'll share my Polymer story. Once upon a time, I worked for a company that was super excited about Polymer. This was like 3 years ago, very early days. It was like in the, it wasn't even version 1 yet. And like the API change between 0.5 and 1, like it scared the company so much that they were like, nope, not doing this. We're going to React. And that was that. And so I love that like Polymer 2 has this backwards compatibility thing. Like it's like they learned their lesson. I mean, talk about like making it easy to integrate and move forward, with your existing apps. Like that's awesome.
Well, you ended up, at the end of the day, Polymer, sort of the 1X series of things, sort of lived around the concept that we sort of had to deal with the APIs we had, right? So we had custom elements and we had shadow, but they were v0 spec, which means they worked great in Chrome, but the overall weight of them across things that did not support them was tough, which is why we ended up with things like Shady and things to make them sort of work in things where we needed them to work, mobile Safari and the like. But 2.0 is sort of, it comes with this sort of new concept around, hey, we have v1 specs now. We have custom elements and shadow, and those are now being implemented by all our favorite major browser vendors. And that sort of makes us overall happy because now we get that improved interop that you want, right? Because we don't have to use things like, Polymer.dom, DOM rather, right? We can just, we can break those sort of things out and just use the way we want to interop. But now we get standard ES sort of 6 class stuff, where, again, we don't have to do all the sort of random things we had to make it sort of work before. Not that it didn't work before. I mean, I shipped a lot of stuff on 1X, and I have no problem with it. And we get interop, right? So if you want to move to 2, you have hybrid. So you can immediately start upgrading your 1.0 apps, as quickly or as slowly as you like, as you sort of move into the wonderful world of, version 1 specs. So yeah, I mean, it was fun to see. We got to see a new PWA out of it, which was Cheese, which is still up, I think. Cheese.polymer-project.org. Yeah. So a lot of fun, fun things you can do. So yeah, I was very happy to see sort of, the progress as the web as a whole has made. I mean, because really Polymer 2 got real small because it really got broken out, in terms of, I don't need all these pieces anymore because V1 is here. So if you want some sugar, you can use Polymer. If you just want to use gesture support, add it. If you don't want to use it, don't. So it's quite a nice change. Again, you sort of see what happens when the web gets specifications that are implemented across a wide range of browsers, as opposed to having to polyfill everything, which just is not, feasible over time.
Yeah, so I guess like the big announcement was that like I've been following like Polymer 2.0 for a while and just like waiting for the day when I can actually start using it, because like it wasn't just like Polymer who had like to work with all this new like web component specs, but you also had to put all the elements and the CLI tool. So they announced like Polymer 2.0 that all the elements, like the existing elements, paper element, iron elements, they're working with 2.0 as well. They have a new CLI called Polymer 1.0, Polymer CLI 1.0, I believe, which worked really well. They also have a new like Purple server. You can deploy. It's written in Node, so you can deploy it on, for instance, App Engine Flexible, and actually serve actually start using the whole like purple pattern using like the Polymer CLI. We can generate like an ES6 bundle, ES6 unbundle, ES5 bundle, ES5 unbundle, like different like configuration depending on what your client can handle. So you get the best of what is available to you. So I think that's like super exciting. I saw a lot of excitement around that. Something that also like this is not Polymer related, but what you're talking about the cheese things. So there was like another presentation with Francois. He was showing like the new shape detection API.
Yeah.
So shape detection is like super awesome. It runs on your phone like natively, so it's not written in JavaScript itself, which means it's more efficient, doesn't drain your battery, and allows you to like really quickly like identify like QR codes, barcodes, faces in the photo. So he wrote like this mini app, I believe it's called Mustache, where you can actually like take a picture of yourself with a camera and record a video, where it lets you overlay like this funny mustache, and it's just like amazing to see that just working in a browser. It's like it like loaded immediately, and there you go. And it's like, wow, this is actually my browser. This could be like one of these like Snapchat or whatever app people are using these days.
Shape detection is amazing. Yeah, so admittedly, I'm biased because I've been using shape detection, or at least testing it in some client apps at the moment that we have that need it, as we put them on industrial tablets and things, and it is so trick.
So what do you use it for?
Oh, it's so amazing.
What is this? What is shape detection, guys? So could you explain this to me? I have not heard of this.
There's a shape like a face or like a barcode, and you can detect it in a picture or a stream or video stream.
It's as simple as that.
Yes. So imagine like companies, they need to track like goods, and they have either barcodes or QR codes. It's easy because you can just print it and put it on. And like now you can write an app super easily without requiring any library, without it draining your battery, and you can just like detect that. The API is super simple, super awesome. And of course, like for pictures, like detecting faces and things like that is super cool. Do you know what else you can detect, Justin? Currently?
It currently, let's see, I know barcode detector works, face works, text I think you can do as well at the moment.
Okay.
And then I feel like I'm missing one. What other method?
There's no like QR code support?
Yeah, QR is there, but I don't know how deep it is because I'm not using the QR one right now. Let me see.
And so is this behind a flag in Chrome?
Yeah, it's behind the flag.
Like
yes.
Okay. Yep. This is exciting.
So yeah, if you want to play with it, you can. I think actually it's been behind a flag since 57 or 58, I want to say. So yeah, you should have it on a device at this point, and eventually it's going into Origin trial, which is even more awesome. Yay!
Very exciting.
But yeah, it's just a very Thank you for bringing that one up, Kenneth. I really like shape detection too.
Yeah, something else I'm super excited about is like WebUSB. We've been using WebUSB in a few projects, and Google decided to actually ship it. So it was supposed to ship in Chrome 60, but now it's like postponed to 61. But I think that's pretty cool. That has been behind the like Origin trial for a while as well. Really cool new API.
Yeah, I have something I want to ship on it as well, but it's not ready yet. I gotta finish writing it.
Justin, don't break the internet, okay?
No, I'm gonna port something that I had that used to work. We'll see.
That's cool. So Kenneth, can you elaborate on WebUSB?
Yeah, WebUSB is really simple. It allows you to connect to USB devices using the web, and you might wonder, why do you want to do that? And you know that Chrome shipped like Web Bluetooth a while ago, so Web Bluetooth allows you to connect to Bluetooth devices using like Bluetooth 4, like the low energy profile. But WebUSB is like, you can imagine, like, for instance, one of the projects we have done is that we have this called like the Zephyr OS, so it's real-time OS for different devices, including some Intel devices, but also works on ARM devices. And we've written like a JavaScript engine on top of that works on that. So it's called like JavaScript runtime for Zephyr OS. And we really wanted people to like be able to do these IoT devices quickly. And as it ships with JavaScript, that's pretty cool. But having people to actually download the whole like source code and type like make install with a JavaScript file to create a Flash image, flash it to the device, that was kind of like cumbersome. So what we have today is basically you take your new device, you plug it into the USB, pops up in Chrome. You can code JavaScript directly in your browser using a super nice IDE we've been developing, and then you just push like deploy, and there you go. And that also works really well and works better than like, for instance, Bluetooth, for instance, in a classroom where you might have like 30 students. So you can imagine like 30 students with like different, like which device is mine, how do you connect to that? Also, there's a whole lot of legacy hardware out there. People that are like my friend Lars is that he worked for a company that are doing like CPR dolls. They have USB. They're not going to change all these dolls out in the hospitals to suddenly work with Bluetooth, and they might not even be able to use Bluetooth because maybe in a hospital setting they don't want to turn on Bluetooth because it might affect like different equipments they have. So there are definitely use cases. It could also be in industrial settings. You can imagine like you have a big machine. You really want to control it using using the web, but you don't want anyone to be able to hack it. So maybe you have just a USB plug behind the like physical key. So you open up a latch, plug in your USB cord, and then you can like start like getting diagnostics and program it. And also not to forget that USB is so much
Yeah.
faster than Bluetooth. So for many use cases, like hey, for a small like temperature sensor, like Bluetooth is fine. But maybe for an industrial machine where you really need to get so much data, like for debugging purposes, etc., USB might be a much better solution. So having having to be able to use this on the web is just amazing. And I think they've done a really, really great work at Google, coming up with this API, listening to feedback from the community and for people using it, and now actually about to ship it.
Yeah, it's trick. Again, I know one of those wonderful sort of primitives that you can just go and just you can just do so many things with. And we didn't even talk about WebAssembly. Oh, there's so many good things.
Actually, no. But I'm honestly really am excited about the industrial space, right? Because like I know companies like Rethink Robotics, like they make these like manufacturing arms, Baxters, right? They have to basically there's no internet in the factory in China. They don't want internet. They don't want a camera. They don't want any connectivity, right? And so servicing those machines is like really expensive, and so that's like exciting, but also like rural communities, right? Like bringing internet to more places and bringing portability, for people who can't afford expensive devices. Like that's awesome. That's very exciting.
And you said like no internet connectivity. That's why you have progressive web apps. So these can actually work offline and still work use web USB, web Bluetooth, and all of that.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting. I will have to watch out for that. So let's see. So what are we
talking
next?
about?
We're
talking about like offline, so service workers. So one of the announcements that Google did is they used to have this called Service Worker Toolbox, and they turned it into a new project called Workbox. I don't know exactly the URL for that. Well, I think it's workbox.io. So I haven't had time to look at that. Have you looked at that, Justin?
Yeah,
I don't think that's workbox.io.
If you're familiar with Service Worker Toolbox, yeah, if you're familiar with Service Worker Toolbox, Workbox itself is not too big of a jump. There's some things you have to tweak, just in use. But yeah, overall, if you want to get started with Service Worker now, I highly recommend it. Jeff Posnick worked on it amongst some other folks, and it's again Service Worker. I know some people still don't quite understand the progressive nature of it. You don't have to expect it to exist there. But when it does, it can really speed up your app as a whole on the web. It is a network proxy of gorgeousness that just makes things so nice to deal with.
I just wanted to correct the URL. It's workboxjs.org.
Yeah, and we'll link that in the show notes. But Workbox, it just, I actually think like it helps demystify a lot of the like the weirdness around service workers and getting your head around it. I mean, it's a really high level API. They've really done a good job of like consolidating SW Toolbox and SW Precache and all these other miscellaneous libraries that like was like the golden standard like 3 months ago, is now kind of under one umbrella library and organization called Workbox. And I like, from a branding perspective, I love it because it's like, it's not just limiting it to service workers, right? So it's kind of like your developer performance toolbox kit. Like, it's kind of aiming to be like your one-stop shop for like anything related to service workers and or like performance improvements along those lines. So it's a cool library.
Yeah, and it's got some pretty trick little modules in it now too, because it's got things like background sync, which for Toolbox was a little bit difficult to sort of wrap one's head around, but they've got a new little queue plugin now you can use, which is pretty trick when you want to, for network requests that fail, you can basically queue them up and it'll background sync for you. So there's not a lot of code to write around that. They've got, they got broadcast cache updates things. And some other sort of things around that, and they still, if you're familiar with Toolbox from what it used to be and things like that, they still have things like the Google Analytics side of life. They have an example of that. So if you haven't taken a look at it, highly recommended. Good place to start. And it's not framework and or anything specific. Like,
But
you can use it for
there
any type
used
of
to be
project you
some
want.
like elements for like Polymer to integrate with like Service Worker Toolbox. So how does that work, and how does it work with the
Yeah, the
whole
platinum
Polymer
stuff.
CLI, which also generates like Service Worker integration? Do you know that?
I don't know offhand because I haven't shipped anything
Okay,
on the newer version yet. But I know that story
okay,
is being worked out
great.
as a whole. But from the standpoint of the config, is the config that used to be in, which was basically Service Worker Toolbox config. It's a similar sort of arrangement at this point, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the GitHub repo, I mean, like they basically spent like 3 months before I/O like consolidating everything together and making a nicer API that was just right and putting together all of these recipes in one place. If I had to take a wild guess, I think all of the Polymer CLI stuff will eventually end up converting to use this. Like I think as Polymer gets old, like
This
revs up,
is
I
one
think
of the
it'll
things that
probably need to
I
work box.
sometimes think with Polymer is that in the beginning it was all like everything has to be an element, and with some of these things like maybe service worker integration or like Bluetooth, I don't really think that an element might be the best solution, because the whole idea is this should be really flexible. Um, but definitely I want to see it like integrate with like when you use like the Polymer CLI, it will generate like service workers that you can actually use these things without having to like make a whole lot of changes. That would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's tough to, if you take all of the things and wrap them up, like to make it simple as a deploy, which I think is the whole point with the whole Purple server thing as well, which is cool, by the way, because it takes out a lot of headache out of something that can be very difficult to do. Wrapping all that up so that you get an easy sort of deployment and or service worker straight out of the gate is a good idea. If you need the lower level of things, there's nothing preventing us from using your typical Workbox CLI, or if we want to run our own sort of jobs and gulp or whatever, right? You can do your imports and call those methods straight away. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in it.
Yeah, super, super easy, honestly. I mean, if you haven't played around with service workers, go look at Workbox. It's very painless. So, and if it's painful, then just submit an issue on GitHub. Jeff is amazing, or just tweet at him. So,
Yeah, so talking about like progressive web apps, so in order to build a progressive web app, you actually do need a service worker, otherwise it will not be qualified as a progressive web app, at least in Chrome. Um, And because like progressive web is a big thing, everyone has been talking about progressive web apps. Adios Mani, he's been talking a lot about like how to create like progressive web apps using different frameworks. Like if you're already using React or Angular, like can you create a progressive web app? So there's a lot of announcements around that at Google I/O. I believe the Create React app will integrate service like progressive web app in itself, and like Preact CLI integrate like PWA support as well. And Adi had been working together with all of these like framework authors to create this new website called HN for Hacker News PWA.com, where they show like good examples of how to create progressive web apps using different kind of frameworks. So I highly recommend people checking that out as well.
Yeah, it's the modern. It's like the predecessor to do MVC, or not predecessor. Is it the wrong acronym? It's like the modern to do MVC, right? It's very cool.
I think it goes to show just how web oriented as opposed to necessarily product oriented a lot of the web IO stuff was. Because yeah, we talked, there was Polymer, but there was also just a lot of talks about web components as a whole. I mean, Monica's talk sort of went into depth on that, which I thought was an amazing talk if you really want to get started with just how does web components work, and then how does Polymer come into play with this. That's a great talk to start with. There wasn't a lot of Angular talks, but there was an integration talk in terms of Angular and web components, and not Polymer components, just web components. There were things around React, there were things around a lot of frameworks, because it is a very large ecosystem, and I think folks realize that. And they all need to be performant. At the end of the day, like, if you're not performant for the web, then you're just, then why? Why wouldn't you want to be? So there was a lot, like the pre-React stuff I thought was amazing. It was just goes to show you, hey, there's a lot of folks working on this, and that's good for us, and it's good for the web.
Yeah, it is, and also kudos to Adi and others in the community for like wrangling the sheep that are like open source contributors. Like, how amazing is that like he got Dan Abramoff to like submit a PR like less than 24 hours, right, before his IO announcement, right, and get that merged in, and like make that huge announcement where it's like, hey, guess what? React CLI now has support for PWA right out of the box starting now, and same with React, right? I mean, that's like, it's not easy to do that in OS, and it's a huge deal, and it's like really exciting. I'm also really confused as to why there were so many big announcements that were at talks, and I'm kind of like bummed that like we don't see people like Adi Osmani and Paul Irish like at the day one keynote, because really like that's the exciting stuff, and as a developer, like that's what I'm really excited to hear about. It's like, why is that? Like, I'm asking you, Justin and Ken, like seasoned PDEs.
Corporations have products they want to push. I think when you have a keynote, you're never going to touch on everything. Which, again, if you're trying to cover some ground that
The keynote is for the media. It's about like news, and a lot of these things is just like, whether you can use like, there's Kotlin, that's not, maybe that's keynote material, maybe it's not. It's like very developer focused, or whether like, now we have this new API for progressive web apps. Like the media, they don't even know what a progressive web app is, most of them. So like that's not what they care about. They care about the big brands, like what's going on with YouTube, what's going on with Google Assistant, because they want to see whether like Google Home can compete against like Amazon Echo. They want to know that like Google is leading the AI in revolution. So that's what the keynote is about. It's about like, it's also for like the media, and it's for like the shareholders. Like Google is doing well. They still got it. They have a lot of exciting new things going on, and new product launches, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not so much for the developers.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So do we need like a Google I/O, like an unconference Google I/O? Is that what we need? Is that what you're saying, Ken?
Well, I guess that is exactly what the developer keynotes were for. And we do have like like last year, was one of the best conferences I've ever been to, was like the Chrome Dev Summit. So if you're developer, like a web developer, that's definitely a pretty awesome conference to attend.
Yeah,
Chrome. And it's
so
free.
Google I/O is the big
and
media
it's
show.
Free. You can get a spot.
Well, it might be free, but for me, I have to fly to the US and hotels and stuff.
Not easy. Could be difficult to get to.
For a lot of people, it's not free unless they get some nice sponsorship. So we could, of course, hope that it will happen in Europe maybe next time, but like, who knows?
Yeah.
Arranging all these conferences, I think it's amazing that Google are doing like the Progressive Web App Roadshow, they're doing Chrome Dev Summit, they're doing Google I/O, they're doing the Polymer Summit. They even announced the Polymer Summit is actually in Copenhagen next time. Super exciting for me as I live in Copenhagen. So it's kind of amazing they can do all these different like conferences and still get work done.
Yeah, I sometimes I wonder sometimes. I'm like, how does anyone sleep? Because maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's our problem, Kev. We're sleeping too much.
Wait, Kenneth and Justin, I asked myself this about you. I'm like, when do they sleep? So you guys are asking that about them. I get it. Okay.
Yes.
I'm like, Jesus Christ, Kenneth. You're like pushing like, oh yeah, I just added a whole new feature to the internet called web sensors. Like that's exciting, you know? Anyways, so guys,
we're all trying our best, right?
So actually, I want to give a shout out to Rob Dodson, who gave one of my favorite talks like ever, and definitely like top, my personally my favorite talk of I/O, and it was a really good.
Oh my God, I missed that talk.
Oh no, you should listen to it. So it was a talk on accessibility, and to me, this talk was two things. Like, not just was the content like incredible, and for me as a developer, I walked away with so many good take home points, links, etc. But it was also a really good example of how to give a technical talk. And so for any people that are interested in doing technical talks and speaking in front of large audiences, like, follow the template that Rob laid out, like solid talk, seriously. And anyone who has missed it, like go watch it on YouTube. Rob Dodson, Accessibility, Google I/O 2017.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will do.
So we're running up against time. I think we should probably wrap up episode 131, as it were. Any closing thoughts as we round this out?
Well, as I said, there was so much going on. It was kind of difficult to staying on top of everything, but it was so nice, like meeting all the people, and I was actually very excited to see like a lot of actually people from Microsoft was there as well, from the Edge team. So I talked a lot with Kenneth, who's the PM for DevTools, but there were a lot of other people there as well. I think it's super exciting to see that, and they're there to talk to people and find out what's going on with developers. What should we do as well? Maybe this web USB is a cool thing. Maybe we should implement that in Edge, or like, I think that's like the cool thing. The same thing with the Googlers. Like, you could just go into the small like Chrome tent and walk up and say, you're the guy working on Lighthouse. So I have this idea. What do you think? So it's definitely a good event, like to meet people who work on these things that you care about, and also to meet like other people and network. That's probably the main part for me, beyond all the awesome announcements.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive, and it's an even more exciting time to be writing software. So that's my takeaway.
Overall, pretty solid event. And another pretty solid podcast, if I don't say so myself. Amal, Kenneth, thank you so much for being with us today. Danny, I know you're silently sitting there because you are in a meeting currently. But thank you also for coming back on the show. And this has been episode number 131 of the Web Platform Podcast, and we hope to see you next week.